This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from an Expats Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia.
Hi everyone, welcome to this video. Today we're going to talk about Moscow versus St. Petersburg and which city is better for expats. If you enjoy our videos, please like and subscribe. It really helps the YouTube algorithm. Marcus, we both lived in Moscow and St. Petersburg during our time in Russia. Let's get into a couple different things that are different between them and try to help people make a decision on which city they should live in. So first we wanted to talk about what are the things to do when you're living in either one of these cities. For me personally, Moscow by far had way more things to do, unless maybe you like museums, then St. Petersburg is better. But what do you think? Things to do in Moscow versus St. Petersburg.
Yeah, so I lived in both cities. I lived in Moscow with children. By far, Moscow has more things to do overall, right? So I felt like living in Moscow, you could really find something new almost every weekend, or and it'd almost be endless. In St. Petersburg, I did a few things with my family as well, and also while I was single, and also great things. But I felt like there came a point where it's like, okay, what else can we do? So over a period of time, you're gonna run out of things let's say, run out of new things to do.
Right. Well, I want to just point out real quick that from, if we're comparing Moscow and St. Petersburg to any major American city, there's still a massive amount of things to do. It's not like there's so much to do in Moscow, it's never ending, and in St. Petersburg, there's nothing. I just think that St. Petersburg is a smaller city, and there's just subsequently less things to do, but still both cities offer an amazing experience. But I think the just sheer number of different things to do in Moscow is just, it's so much bigger, and there's so many more things. So you have, if you can think of it in the world, they have it in Moscow. You want indoor skiing, snow skiing, they've got it. You want an indoor water park, they've got it. You want a dinosaur museum, they've got it.
Right.
Whereas in St. Petersburg, some of those things don't exist.
Right. And I would say that for the expat who wants to go to St. Petersburg for, 2 years or less, I'm sure you're going to be fine. You're going to find entertainment all the time. But maybe for the long term, life in St. Petersburg, you would maybe at some point think, okay, what else is there to do? And I guess you would turn to travel nearby and things like that, which you can go to Finland, right. You can go to, the Baltic countries. That's also a plus.
No, well, hey, you're forgetting one of the most important places in Russia, Karelia, which is right nearby.
Right.
There's near Petrozavodsk. There's lots of awesome nature to see up there. So you're right. I think actually if you get out into the Leningradska Oblast, there's lots of historical things to see. I remember, what is that road that goes to Lake Ladoga? I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, there's this road that goes out to Lake Ladoga, which is one of the biggest lakes in the world. You've also got a lot of the World War II stuff. There's a big fortress, or kind of a castle-like fortress outside of St. Petersburg. There's lots of stuff to do, but it's more like cultural and museum type. So you've got like the arts in St. Petersburg, and then you've got like the kind of the real cultural and museums. They've got it all in St. Petersburg. I would even say there's probably more there than there is in Moscow. But in Moscow, you've got lots more recreation. Like you've even got multiple golf courses in Moscow. And I don't think there are any in St. Petersburg.
Right.
And then the next topic we wanted to touch on was weather. And it seems like why should weather matter? I mean, it's cold in both places, right? But, we wanted to just kind of say there is a difference between the winter, especially in Moscow versus in Petersburg. Marcus, what was your experience?
Yeah, so I remember, in Moscow, there being consistently more snow. In St. Petersburg, you have the wind chill factor. So it felt colder in St. Petersburg. But for me, I didn't come from a hot place. I didn't grow up in a hot place. I grew up in Oregon, where it's very mild. And for me, Moscow and St. Petersburg, the winters were just cold. There was almost like, basically two levels. It was a little bit cold and a lot cold. And, I didn't really notice a huge difference, but I know you had a different perspective.
Right. So I grew up in northern Maine. And to be honest, I think the coldest days in Maine were definitely colder than it ever was in Moscow or St. Petersburg in terms of, most cold. It was colder longer for sure in Moscow. So it really started getting cold at the end of October. And then it didn't warm up until April. But those coldest days in February, definitely in Maine, it was colder. That said, though, I think the bigger surprise for me was how hot it gets in the summer in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So for our international viewers, it's quite normal for the weather to get to, 30 degrees Celsius in the summer, which is almost 90 Fahrenheit in both places. I think it was more common in Moscow to get really, really hot for an extended period of time. I remember the first apartment we had only had an air conditioner in the living room, not in the bedroom. And oh my gosh, there were 2 weeks that first summer in Moscow with my wife where, she was used to it because where she grew up, it also gets very, very hot. But oh my gosh, the heat too. Sometimes people are not ready for it, and it can be for 2-3 weeks in July and August. It can be very, very hot in Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Well, I was telling my wife, I don't remember ever complaining about the hot summers, and she reminded me that that's when we were usually on vacation, for a month and a half, and so I was like, we didn't have any of our apartments had an air conditioner, but now that I remember, we went on vacation for a good month and a half during the summer months. So
one other thing I wanted to quick mention about the weather. In the winter in St. Petersburg, it rains a lot. So because you're on the Gulf there of Finland, it rains a lot during the winter. So what that means is a lot of times you've got an ice rink outside your apartment. There are not dedicated companies that clean everywhere. It's usually up to the building maintenance companies. And believe me, if you're not living in a very, very nice place, it's rarely ever cleaned. I mean, I fell down many, many times leaving my apartment in St. Petersburg. I saw many old ladies falling down. It's quite sad, actually, that isn't taken care of better. In Moscow, the roads were always sometimes slushy, but I never encountered, like slick black ice like you would find very often in St. Petersburg. Now, again, if you live in the very center of St. Petersburg, this isn't a problem. They've, much better about cleaning it. But if you're living, 4 or 5 stops from the center of St. Petersburg, the infrastructure in terms of snow removal and ice removal is not there. I don't know if you had the same experience, Marcus.
I don't remember, a distinct, a huge difference. I do remember that Moscow was quite, they were faster to de-ice the sidewalks and things like that.
Right.
But I mean, again, it's kind of one of those things when, if you go kind of when you're younger, when I went to St. Petersburg when I was younger, so I didn't really notice a lot of things until, they started becoming annoying later on. Like, when you're walking and slush flips up on your pant legs and things like that. I noticed that in Moscow, but in St. Petersburg, because of the wind chill factor, it was less prevalent because it'd freeze.
It was just ice.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. Those are kind of my thoughts on weather. I think it's kind of a toss-up. Both have their pluses and minuses. It's a bit milder in St. Petersburg in terms of temperature, but you've got the wind from the ocean. The next thing we wanted to talk about was transportation. And in my opinion, there's not a lot of differences here, but Marcus, I know you have a bit of a different thought. Traffic is absolutely terrible at rush hour in both cities.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I remember looking, I think it was 2018 or 2019, the worst 2 cities in the world for traffic. Number 1, Moscow. Number 2, St. Petersburg. So they are definitely up there in terms of traffic. The trade-off is that you've got a great metro in both cities. But where I lived in St. Petersburg, the metro was way more packed. It really depends on which line you live on. I lived on the blue line south. Man, if you wanted to go rush hour, it was like sardines in the train. And 20 minutes like that every single day, twice a day, was terrible. But, I mean, it is what it is. In Moscow, I was on the green line and there was hardly anyone there. So,
yeah, it really depends where you live, how far from the center you live. I didn't think... So when we visit St. Petersburg, I would often think, wow, the subways are quite empty, but I think that's because it was not rush hour, right? So, and the trains come the subway trains come less often, and it seemed like everything was a little bit slower. The one real distinction that I made was when you are given an address in Moscow, you can use the subway to get there, or like get close to it and then walk. You don't necessarily have to always use the bus or tram or a taxi. Usually, I mean, within reason. But in St. Petersburg, sometimes due to the distance of the stations, between lines and stations, and
lots of walking,
the canals, you sometimes had to use multiple means of transportation.
Transport to get.
So
right. Yeah, I never actually thought about that. I mean, definitely true. I remember when I lived in St. Petersburg, I spent lots more time on the bus. I mean, if you want to get around anywhere in the very center of St. Petersburg, the metro is practically useless because, unless you're going right by the metro station, you got to get off and walk 20 minutes to your destination, whereas you can just take a bus.
I want to point out also, before we move on to the next one, in both cities, typically expats tend to live near the center, so a lot of expats don't have cars, right? I had a car in Moscow. Whenever we drove to St. Petersburg, I drove in St. Petersburg, and on a number of occasions, I remember the traffic. I was thinking, the traffic should be better. It wasn't, but compared to Moscow. But if you're an expat and living like outside of St. Petersburg, the city center, I would say, having a car might be a good idea.
Yeah. Although parking is a big pain in St. Petersburg compared to Moscow.
Right. So, I mean, it's for the typical expat, they don't necessarily have cars anyway. They live, in the city center or close to it.
Right.
But, it's hard to say. It just depends on kind of your preferences.
Right. I would agree with that. The next one we want to talk about is atmosphere. Marcus, the atmosphere obviously is very different in both Moscow and St. Petersburg. Moscow is a huge global city with very much a focus on business and getting things done. St. Petersburg is a bit more laid back, and people are more interested in relaxing and the arts and culture. What do you think? What's the biggest difference in atmosphere between these two cities?
I think the number one difference for me that I noticed quite quickly was that in Moscow, people are always busy. Like
yes.
My wife kind of made fun of me because after a year or two in Moscow, she said that I started walking super fast. And I just you kind of get pulled into the rhythm of the city. And so in Moscow, so when we would go on vacation or visit family in the US or Germany or something, we'd just be on a leisure walk, and it seems like she's like, you're not at work, or you're not going to work. So I think that's really...
Sonia always says to me, Sonia, my wife, always says when we go for a walk somewhere, "Kuda toropishься?"
Yes. Why are you hurrying?
Where are you hurrying to?
So that's funny. That's kind of my feeling too. When you go to St. Petersburg, it's like almost too slow. If you're coming right from Moscow to St. Petersburg, it's like people aren't barely moving. But it depends on your lifestyle, right? If you're that kind of person, then St. Petersburg might be a better place as far as kind of laid back and more artsy type, and enjoy the surroundings.
There are more hipsters in St. Petersburg than in Moscow. That was my observation. Much more of a hipster.
You can tell by the types of cafes that you go to, and you look at the menus, and they're all using the latest kale and I don't know, coconut rice and things like that.
Right.
So it depends on kind of your preference, but I would say that both are great depending on whether you're more artsy and laid back versus you have business to do, and maybe you enjoy your job. Then Moscow could be a good place.
Right. So the next one we want to talk about is job opportunities. And for me personally, if we're talking just about quantity of job opportunities, it's not even a question. There are probably 10 times more job opportunities for foreigners in Moscow than there are in St. Petersburg. When I was in St. Petersburg, it was really, really hard to find something that was not English teaching. If you want to teach English or be an English editor, St. Petersburg will be totally fine. You'll find whatever you need. But if you really want to branch out into some more professional job or even start a small business, the opportunities in Moscow are significantly more than in St. Petersburg. Would you agree with that, Marcus?
Yeah, just because of the numbers. I mean, you have, potentially way more customers, if you're serving Russians. Also, I read a figure just, several years ago that Moscow was growing at a rate of 100,000 per year, right? So, I mean, and then recently they, in the last couple of years, they extended Moscow, the city of Moscow. Yeah. They call it Novaya Moskva, New Moscow in the south part.
Right.
So, I mean, when you're talking about, potential clients or customers or obviously it's no comparison. I would say for sure that nobody goes to, very few people go to St. Petersburg because there's a better job opportunity. I mean, it's more of a lifestyle choice, right?
Right.
So there are things to do in St. Petersburg, and I was considering going to St. Petersburg with my family, but I would do it if I were kind of working from home remotely, independent of,
having an employer.
Right.
So, I mean, job opportunities, it's not really even a question. If you need a job and you're, relying on having a job, your best bet is to go to Moscow. Unless you want to do English teaching, then doesn't matter so much. And the last thing we wanted to talk about was cost of living. And to be honest, the cost of living is not that much different. Rent is maybe 15 to 20% less in St. Petersburg than in Moscow. But I found that most food and consumer products were actually cheaper in Moscow than they were in St. Petersburg. Marcus, we kind of talked about this before we started filming, but did you think more or less the same?
Yeah, every time I go visit to St. Petersburg, my wife's from there. We visit friends and family. I compared a lot. So I'd go into the store and I'm like, is it cheaper here? Is it, same products, that the same thing. I would go to, the same nearby stores, the chain stores, and it seemed to be on par with Moscow, and Moscow sometimes was even cheaper just because of the demand. Right. I know, people who have come to, they've gone from St. Petersburg to Moscow to buy cars because there's a huge selection, of course, and they're cheaper price. Actually, there are a lot of people who go all the way to Moscow from the regions to buy cars because of the demand, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The only thing that I really recognized, was slightly cheaper was, taxis, but also
that's
rent.
True.
So rent was, it was a good amount cheaper, but the amount of money that you would make in Moscow would definitely trump any difference in the rent.
I was just going to say that. So if rent is 20% cheaper, maybe 30%, depending on the region of St. Petersburg you choose, your salary is going to be 40 or 50% less than it would be for the exact same job in Moscow. So it's a lifestyle choice. If you want to live in St. Petersburg, just know that it's a lifestyle choice. You're going to have fewer opportunities, but you're going to have a more relaxed life, more cultural opportunities. And that's who should choose St. Petersburg. If you're a young professional, just getting started in Russia or abroad in general, I think you're best suited to go to Moscow, learn the ropes. And then from there, if you want to go to St. Petersburg, you can. That would be my advice. What do you think, Marcus?
I would agree with that 100%. If you're in my mind, the ideal kind of expat life in Russia is still the location independent, where you could choose any city that you want. But even in that case, one of these other aspects will come into play, like things to do the things to do in Moscow might lean you towards Moscow over St. Petersburg. But again, if you're more laid back and maybe, I wouldn't say, I don't know another way to describe it, but maybe you're retired and you don't necessarily depend on salary so much, right? You have savings. You probably would enjoy St. Petersburg more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we hope you enjoyed the video. We'd love to know what you think if you've spent time in both cities. I know we have a few subscribers who are very passionate about Moscow versus St. Petersburg. So let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video.